We all know that sometimes coming to the table for the first time as a new player to a complex game can be overwhelming. In the world of Dungeons & Dragons, the rule set is gargantuan, and you might have been invited to play that game and you're thinking, oh my God, I'm never going to be able to grasp all of this. If you're thinking about being a game master, that can be doubly intimidating. Now, first of all, we decided to put together today's podcast with Rachel from the Faint Divinities and Nathan Gilvey because, frankly, he was the one who brought it up and he plays in our group, on this notion of welcoming new players to the table and keeping them engaged, also allowing them to have the agency to learn the game at their own pace. So this conversation, I think, is really robust today. And I'm looking forward to you hearing about how we kind of suss all of this out. I would like to preface today's recording with the following. When we got together for tonight's recording, we had to bring Rachel, our guest, in through a Discord voice channel, which created some challenges in terms of her being able to hear what we were saying, as well as recording in semi-good quality. Anyway, the challenges were many. So there's a little bit of voice reflection in this one. The audio quality is not perfect. I'm apologizing in advance. I hope you're going to stick around. Would love for you to realize that the learning curve is steep. Anyway, stay tuned. This is a great topic. Hey everybody, welcome to iCast Guidance, your Dungeons & Dragons podcast, where every week Garrett and I take a ruler mechanic in the game of D&D that's lackluster or needs improvement, and we offer you advice on how to make your game around that rule more interesting or more fun. So sharpen up those daggers. We're getting started right now. Hey everybody, good to have you along for the ride today. We have two special guests talking with us today, which I am really excited about. So first, we have Rachel from the Faint Divinities, which I'm super thrilled about. Hi Rachel, how's it going?
Hi, it's going great. How are you?
I'm doing great. I'm excited about our talk today. And I also have Nathan Gilvey, who is part of our normal gaming crew. Nathan, how's it going?
I'm doing fantastic. How are you?
I'm great.
Just lovely.
Yes. And, tonight's topic that we're going to be talking about is we are covering a fair bit of ground here. We're going to be talking about this notion of welcoming new players to the table. We're going to be talking about this idea of inclusivity in the game. And we're also going to be talking about this idea of accessibility and how to make tabletop role-playing games more accessible. This is a wide range of topics, but I think we all have kind of some input on here that I think is going to be really fantastic. But before we get to that, we are going to we're going to read a comment from last week's podcast or from a previous podcast, which we said we're going to do. And I had one that I loved. I had somebody made a comment that said, it says, awesome topic. Taking good notes shows appreciation to the DM's artwork. And I'm just going to cut that there. There's a little bit more to that comment, but that's gold. Taking good notes shows appreciation to the DM or GM's hard work. I love this because I feel like this is the type of thing where, as a college professor, I want to see my students taking notes. It shows me that they care. So, I don't know. Thoughts on that? Anybody?
I think... Yeah. Oh, Rachel, please go ahead.
Oh, sure. Okay. Listen, I'll do it this time. So I am always going to, as a forever GM, and I know that gets thrown around a lot, but it is just true for a lot of us. Once you learn that skill set, you are always doing it. It is an act of service that you're doing for your friends, your family, your strangers that you're excited to get into new systems and stuff. Because we are putting in so much effort into that, it is such a good thing to get back that from your players of showing that they are having a good time. It's so easy for us to get in our heads after games and thinking, I don't know if I'm telling a compelling story that these players are feeling in the world and everything. But if someone is taking notes and can tell you and really speak to what they are going through at the table, it gives you the buy-in that is necessary for you to continue telling a good story. So I think that's lovely. What a lovely commenter.
Yeah, I love that one. Nathan, what do you want to say?
I think it's also just like, as Rachel said, there's so much time that goes into being a DM. I've only ever DM'd once for like one session of a one shot. So I only have like a little glimpse of all that effort it takes like going into that, whereas the players can sort of just pull up and just have a good time, and like you can think about your character throughout the week, but it's not nearly as much work. So I think it's just not just a duty, but it's a sign of respect to your DM that you're paying attention, and two, like you're being told these pieces of information in the real world. Like if you're in a real life scenario, nobody's there to recite back what somebody said to you previously. You either have to retain that information yourself or write it down somewhere, right? And it just puts like a dead stop in the game where it's like some sort of detail is relevant and I have to ask you to stop your train of thought to say, hey, Todd, could you remember this thing for me? Because I didn't remember it myself because I didn't write it down. Yeah. And then wherever direction you were going could be completely lost.
Right. And I would the final thing I think I would say on this, well, I want to give you a chance to answer that, Garrett, if you have anything to say on that.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think you guys really covered it. I don't want to,
Well, I was going to say this is from the standpoint of collaborative storytelling, because if that's what we're doing when we're playing these games, right? And I insist on my players building part of my world. Mm-hmm. If your note taking is solid, you're probably going to point out to me at certain points things that you felt were more relevant than I might have. And so that's actually going to reveal things to me about how you're hearing what's developing. And so I think that's an essential part of this. And Rachel, I saw you gesture that you're thinking about as part of that.
Yeah. Well, to me, the collaborative storytelling is the biggest piece. I think that there is, I don't want to call it the old guard because I get really tired of people saying old and new guard, but I do think that there is kind of an archaic concept in tabletop RPG that the GM is the sole provider of the experience and the story and the manipulatives and the, they order the pizza. It's just, and I think so much more as we're moving forward and you're seeing this. Ivan Van Norman in a recent interview actually said that you're seeing a lot of tabletop RPG evolve together. He called it, I wish I could remember, but he said specifically all of these different systems are learning from each other and growing in a similar direction. One of those pieces that they're all leaning into is putting player agency back into the games, putting like that sense of your story there, that, hi campers, just remember, this is your camp experience. Is that piece of it back in. So I love what you're saying there about that collaboration. It shows if someone is there and immersed.
Yeah, exactly. And, I'm realizing as we're saying this, there's like a personal note in here for our game, because I was just editing our last episode of our game, and diligently Eric, one of our players who plays through, is tapping away at the keyboard like furiously. Eric writes everything. Every single word goes into his notes, and the whole time his mic must have just been trained over the keyboard because it's like clack, 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 clack. And I'm like, guys, come on, this is too much. At the same time, I'm saying, no, I love you to take notes, but yes. So
yeah, but not like that.
Not like that. Take notes, but not the way you're taking notes, the way I want you to take notes.
Yeah, your fun is wrong and your notes are wrong.
That's right. That's right. All right, great. So thanks for that comment out there. We really appreciate that. And listen, you guys that are listening now, if you have thoughts and comments on what we're going to be talking about today, you can head on over to our YouTube channel at Wither and Bloom Studios. Find this podcast there. Drop some comments on it. Let us know what you're thinking about. We will probably read one of those on the next podcast that we drop. So thank you for that. We appreciate that. All right. So for tonight's topic that we're talking about, we should get that rolling. Nathan, you were the one who brought this idea to me, that you were the one who wanted to talk about this. You want to get us rolling?
Sure. So I've been very excited by this podcast. I started listening to podcasts again in the car, and I listened to a few episodes. I was like, man, I want to get an episode idea out there. And actually, this is sort of relevant to some things we were planning on talking about later, but I'm not so versed in the rules of D&D. I really know next to nothing about the vast expanse, the practical galaxy that is the rule book. That comes from being a new player. I was like, well, something neat that we could talk about is how do you get people to the table and ensure or try as best as you can to have that individual have a good experience and want to come back.
That's part of the trick, right? Is like how, and this is my key anxiety when I start a new game, is am I going to do this well enough as a DM or GM? Am I going to do this well enough to show my players a good time? And so, yeah, Garrett, you had said something about the overwhelming factor, which is the thing that drives people away.
Yeah. And I mean, part of this came from Rich. One of our players, Rich, does a thing where he does like D&D on the street or news on the street. And he went around a town and asked, what do you think of when you hear D&D? And what resonated with me watching this back was one guy said it feels daunting to him. He hasn't ever played the game, but he's watched other players play it. And he says that it seems like a lot. And he says that he's seen friends play it, but he doesn't know how to play and how much is a mental or written down as rules and how to even get into it. And he says it just seems like a lot and it's intimidating to get into the game.
Yeah, I've heard that before. Rachel, you've got something to say.
Yeah, so I think that's really important that we're all aware of, is that it's kind of a good problem to have, right? That because 10 years ago, we saw a huge spike, a huge uptick in the number of players that were playing specifically Dungeons and Dragons. But you know me, I'm an advocate for Daggerheart. So I'm going to say tabletop RPG, you guys. Yeah. So we saw a big uptick in there, and it's so prevalent that now there are so many players who already know the system and already know the game. And I'm talking about Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition, that getting in feels very burdensome. I like to say that the floor to getting into tabletop RPG is very high and feels much higher than it is. So I think making all of tabletop RPG more accessible to new players, and especially diverse players, people of colors, women, all of these different groups, it's really going to be important as we move forward, because we all in this space, we want this to grow. And the only way to grow it is to make your system and your space very accessible and open.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, on the note of the diverse aspect of this, one of the things I've always loved about D&D is D&D tries to teach us the importance of that diversity. You are not going to form a 4-person party with 4 barbarians. It tells you that through a diverse network of talents and types, you are going to have the best possible outcome. It's the same thing with voices at the table, right? So if you bring people from different backgrounds to your table, you're going to have the most effective and immersive experience, I believe. So, and I know that's not the entire point of the comment we're making here about getting people into the game, but I think that that's a really important part of it. And especially if you sort of frame your explanation of the game from that idea, is that, look, people of all different types, characters of all different types are going to have the best possible outcome here.
Right.
Yeah.
We just touched on the topic of diversity being important in the gameplay itself, how it's good and helpful to have a bunch of different classes to give your party the best shot at defeating the big bad guy or saving the town or doing whatever. And on the topic of diversity in our tables as well, I think stepping into how do you get somebody into a game of D&D, an important part of diversity is being inviting to all different types of people. And I think what really makes or breaks that first session for a new player is an inviting group dynamic.
For sure, which I have seen the opposite of on so many occasions. I've seen groups that, all right, so first of all, Rachel, you said that the floor for entry into TTRPGs, or specifically Dungeons and Dragons, is here, and it's probably much higher, or it seems much higher. I think one of the things that gets in the way of what you just described, Nathan, is this idea that once you know the game, there's this authority that sort of sometimes takes over certain tables where for newcomers into that space, there's kind of a little bit of a, what's the word I'm looking for? It's kind of an attitude about the fact that I know and you don't.
That's just gatekeeping.
A superiority complex certainly is in place. Yeah. And Nathan said gatekeeping. That is a huge, I never really have understood gatekeeping as a concept because, first of all, the more people that enjoy my hobby, the more opportunities I have. Also, the hobby itself will grow and become more accessible to me, less expensive to me. It's a weird concept, but yeah, I think that it's so built into some people's sense of self that I was in the first people who liked this thing, that they pin it as like a badge of honor on their lives, and then people cannot approach the thing that they love without them needing to defend that. And that's a strange thing to do when instead you can be the, I don't know, big brother type, big sister type parent that welcomes with open arms another person, a newcomer into the space. And man, don't you want that community more than you want the alternative?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Nathan and I were talking about this before coming on, the podcast here. Why don't you want to bring more players into your table? Like, I will welcome any player that wants to try out this game or any game, because it's more players. It's more fun. Why not experience what I'm experiencing? And I want to relate that to you. But just to back it up one little bit, you might remember this, Todd. Addie told us, one of our other players at the table, Addie told us about this D&D group at college. And he went there, and it's like a D&D club. They were not invited into, it was this group that didn't want to invite anyone else to their table, and they were very standoffish and just it was just this is our group and we don't want to invite anyone else to the table. What's that about?
Well, I have to say, and this is gonna blow up the comments section a little bit, but I'm gonna talk about an experience I had with a different game that was extreme in this regard, and so it was Magic the Gathering. I got into Magic the Gathering when it was in its beta, so yeah, I had a Black Lotus. Yeah, I had several Moxies, and I collected cards like crazy because I loved it. But you want to know what I didn't do? I never went and played the game. I just started making decks, but I wouldn't play with anybody because I was intimidated, right? When I finally went, there was this great tea house that had lots of people playing Magic the Gathering. I'm like, you know what? I'm going to grab my binder, a couple of decks, I'm going to go. I went, and I don't know if Magic the Gathering is still like this because I stopped playing, but it was awful. It was awful. It was like, if I wasn't fast enough to keep up with the players that I sat down with, they were like, are you done? Are you done? They're jittering all over the place. And it's just I couldn't take a second to they didn't want to learn for me to learn. It was just they wanted to show me how fast they could play their deck and how fast they could beat me and end it. And I was just I'm out. And that binder never got another pack added to it. I was like, I'm done. I'm out.
I've experienced the same exact thing. Because I long time ago played a little bit, wanted to get back into it, and I went to a game shop and realized just because I had been out of it for so long, if you weren't an expert at it, you weren't invited at the table, pretty much.
Yeah, Magic the Gathering, and I have a lot of friends who are really wonderful in the Magic the Gathering space and everything, but because of its competitive nature and a lot of people who frequent game stores, your FLGS, your friendly local game store, that really Magic the Gathering is the bread and butter there because tournament nights are when they get the biggest draws, they get the most people. So the tournament aspect of that, depending on what you're doing, it really does encourage some adversarial personalities in the space. Not everyone, but there are certainly some people who, again, want to make a name for themselves. And I don't know why they think that playing a lovely card game is where to do that. Which is kind of, I'm going to bring up my partner in this who plays Daggerheart with me when we play on our channel and everything. He has this thing of being why are people not open in these spaces? Because these are spaces where it's the thing that you're defending is being the king of imagination game. That's a weird thing to get super, territorial about. Like, you're the king of cute little card collector. And I don't mean to demean it. I'm just saying, like, let's refocus, everybody. Let's chill out.
I love that. And I got to say, I didn't really consider the competitive nature of the game when I was making my initial complaint. So of course that's going to flavor the whole thing to a degree. And this might be a way where we can bring more players into TTRPGs by, sort of emphasizing the fact that this is not a competitive game, right? So I wonder if there's our first hook for a new player to the table, is to talk about how, okay, this is not a game about winning or losing. This is not a game about beating the DM or the GM beating you. It is about a kind of collaboration, right? And that's the best avenue to get maybe started. I don't know.
Right. Well, I mean, on the topic of collaboration, I really felt the first time I joined this table, it was for, I think it was for Frozen Sick, that one.
The one
module.
shot.
Yeah, the one shot. The process was really lovely. Just a really lovely table. Todd, great DM. Like, you were there too. Just great players. And it really felt the entire time that I was being taken under everyone's wing. Because I was completely new to this whole thing. All I knew is that I was probably going to be rolling dice and I could choose whatever I wanted to do, which I had no idea what that implied. But while I felt like I was being taken under everyone's wings, that shows that bringing somebody to the table is a group effort in and of itself, while the game itself is about a team effort.
Yeah, I saw a great quote while I was doing research for this episode that said the people at the table are more important than the game. And I love that, because that means that whatever scenario you happen to get into in the game, however deeply immersed you are in the game, however important the parsing of a rule might be over one play that you made or another, if something happens that's going to affect one of my players, then I don't care about what's happening in the game at that point. We have to check ourselves and say, all right, we need to reset, something along those lines. So I love that.
Right.
Yeah, there's just, I think just one little pin in the button of this final conversation around winning or losing is that I do like a lot of these emerging systems that are coming out for tabletop RPG, because they are including a lot of language around what you should expect out of the game, because they expect an influx of people into the space. So I know that I'm talking about it a lot, but I actually have been reading the manuscript for Daggerheart all week for reasons. And they have this specific thing that it says, there is no winning or losing in Daggerheart in the traditional gaming sense. The experience is collaborative storytelling effort between everyone at the table. The characters may not always get what they want or achieve their goals the first time around. There may be big mistakes, but the game has no win or lose condition, because the winning this is where that little joke thing of the treasure was the friends we made along the way. Tabletop RPG literally is that. It's just true.
It so is. I know a specific listener that's going to love that you just said that. And I will say this, and I love that you're bringing in the way Daggerheart sort of made the tenets of the game really beautiful. That's a really beautiful thing to say, is, we're going to make mistakes along the way. There's the first line of the Dungeons and Dragons Player's Handbook, when they talk about this, says Dungeons and Dragons is a game of collaborative storytelling. And I always said I wanted to change one word in that. Dungeons and Dragons should be a game about collaborative story building. And the reason for that is storytelling assumes there's a story to tell, number one. And if there's a story to tell, that means there's an author to that story. Stories typically have an author. I do know they usually use the word collaborative in there, I'm pretty sure. But authorship is ownership. And if you have ownership at the table, that means somebody's in charge. That means somebody has a place that has more agency than everybody else at the table. That's problematic. So I love how these other tabletop role-playing games are talking about this in a more open framework kind of way, where everyone participates in that process. That's what's important. We had a one shot, not a one shot, but back, I don't know, about a year ago, I started to put together a second session for a couple of players that were very new and wanted to play. And Garrett, you were along for that ride because you were a rules lawyer. And my wife played in that game, and a couple of other people played in that game, one of whom was a friend of my wife's. And she had never played D&D before. I believe her sister was a D&D player, and she was interested in the game. And I'm going to be honest, I hadn't thought a lot about this topic when she came in. But she came in, and Garrett and I both, after session 1, realized, oh my God, she's brilliant at combat strategies and tactics. It was so good. She was so good at the game. And she lasted 2 sessions and then kind of was like, yeah, it's not really my thing. And then later revealed to my wife that she was intimidated by all the rules. And I thought, do you want to know what? I never really assessed or even asked her. How do you feel about this? You know, like, where do you think we stand? What could we do better to make this game more fun for you? And what did we do? We lost a great player.
I know. She was fantastic after session 1, just playing. And we even let her know this. Like, we were like, you know, we're just such a natural at it. And then come to find that out when you told me that, you know, recently or whatever, I was surprised. But yeah, I agree. I guess not checking in or...
Well, we told her that we thought she was really good at the game, but she could have considered that to just be lip service. I think it really needs to be less about, you know, praising someone's play and saying, so, how do you feel? Where do we stand here? You know, what can we do better?
Well, so also, though, one of the things that I would, man, and some people are going to hate this, but one of the things that I would really say is that letting people know what your table expectations are. And a lot of the time that is in a session 0. I am an advocate for a session 0 every damn day of the week. It's a good time. Mostly it's just fun, but there are systems that are quote unquote crunchy. You know, there are systems that are lightly crispy, whatever you want to call it, right? Very mechanically high. The first tabletop I ever tried was Rollmasters. Oh my God, the crunch. Oh my God, you have to consult a table for every single thing that you do in that system. It is not for me, dog. I like a storytelling narrative driven system, which is why I'm so excited about a lot of these emerging systems and stuff, because at that session 0, if you had led in with a note about rules, right? There are rules as written tables, and there are rulings as interpreted tables, and there are rulings over rules tables, which is what mine always are. I do not give a, can I say a curse word?
Of course.
Fuck. I do not give a fuck if the rule book says that X thing is going to trigger at this point. If that thing is going to cause the at my table to go to, then I'm not doing it, because the thing that matters is the energy that you have at the table. I cannot tell you how many times I've looked in at a gaming store at a table where everyone is engaged, everyone is excited, and then someone stops and says, wait, what about, and then they consult the rules. And if somebody goes on their phone and someone goes to the bathroom and somebody walks away and somebody chooses to exit the game and the space forever because you didn't emphasize the experience at the table.
That's right. Oh my God, that was so well put. Yeah, I've seen that happen so many times. Nathan, I feel like there was a thing you had said before about doing your thing. Do you remember that?
I don't. Is there a little more that you have?
Yeah, I do. I have some more about that. Lovely. You were talking about how in a session 0 with a new player, somebody that's like really possibly intimidated by the rules, or with what Rachel was just talking about with this notion of, I'm more invested in the energy of the table than what the rules are necessarily going to beat that down with.
Right.
You had said one of the best things you could do with a new player is just be like, do your thing.
Right. Yeah. So I had said, I feel like the approach that you took with me that I loved was like, you know, don't worry so much about the rules, because let's be honest, the rules are like, for every rule, there's 10 under that and there's 10 underneath all of those. Right. It's like, it's insane. But I was saying, if you just tell somebody like, don't worry so much about the rules, do what you feel is right. Maybe that's like, wait it out a bit, see what other people are doing, and then come forward as you feel more comfortable to participate in the narrative. And then sometimes I'll ask you to roll a fucking D20.
Right. And it's like, and I'll explain to you what's going on there.
Exactly. It's it's learning by observing and learning by doing. I think there are very few good things out of studying a rule book. Like, studying a rule book was always my least favorite thing, even for simple things like sorry. You know, that little like pop in the dice spins board game and you just go around the track. It's always been my least favorite part of a game. So in this scenario where these rules are popping up like every 2 seconds, like whether it's overtly popping up, like we have to cite, oh, you have to do this at this time because of this, or it's just sort of underlying things. You assimilate those habits as you go along.
Yeah, I like that. All right, listen, we're going to take a quick break.
Word.
And after that break, when we come back, we're going to give you a couple of concrete things that we do at our table and ideas that we have for helping to bring new players into the game, just to kind of make that transition a little bit easier for them and maybe keep them in the game. So we'll be right back. Hello, esteemed listeners. I gotta ask, if you like the content that we're making here on iCast Guidance, I would love it if you went over to patreon.com/Wither and Bloom Studios to sort of help us keep this show going and support us. We just started this up, so I'm going to be doing a monthly newsletter on there, which we've got the September issue out. It gives you insight into what we're doing inside the studio. We're also going to be creating a whole series of PDFs that you can download to help make your game better. Oftentimes, those focus on aspects of our podcast. So we had a Critical Strikes podcast. We're going to have a Critical Strikes PDF that allows you some downloadable, rollable tables that you can use in your game. Exciting stuff. We're also going to be offering swag along the way for certain people that are helping to support us. So head over there and check it out. On top of that, we have a great guest on the show today. Rachel from the Faint Divinities makes fantastic content with her crew around the game of Daggerheart, a game that we are also equally interested in. So if you want to support the Faint Divinities, go watch them on Twitch, which is twitch.tv/The Faint Divinities, or you can find them on YouTube, which is youtube.com/The Faint Divinities. Go check them out, follow them, subscribe to them, give them your love. They deserve it. All right, let's get back to the show. All right, so we're back. I can't help but think of, in all of this that we're talking about, the interview that Deborah Ann Wall did. We had talked about this a number of times. It's gone viral. You've probably seen it out there. And she basically takes the notion of tabletop role-playing as a game and distills it down to the most beautiful, simple thing, right? And we've talked about this.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think this is so good for what we're talking about today, because in that moment, she is talking to a cast member from her acting experience, John Bernthal, who plays, I believe, Frank Castle, right? The Punisher. And he has never played Dungeons and Dragons. And I think he even says something very similar when she asks, have you ever played D&D? And he's like, no, I never, I've always thought about it. And she was like, do you want to play? And he's like, yeah, sure, I'd play with you someday. She's like, no, right now. Without having dice, without having a rule book, without having pencils, paper, a table, anything, she just pulled him in immediately by lowering her voice down to here and describing a story. You're in the woods. You hear behind you the wind in the trees, and all of a sudden, the rustle of something large. And just with those, what have we done? We have said, let's disregard the rulings. Let's just get back to that stage of being a kid when you were playing with your imaginations and your friends. Your stick was a sword, and that was all you needed. Because the systems that are still putting rules over the story have their priorities mixed, in my personal opinion.
Yeah, I have to totally agree with that. And I think this notion of going back to your childhood, and your stick was a sword and you were just running with your imagination and it was allowed to kind of just go. There were no rules to that. I secretly, as someone who is, a parent and well into I'm not even going to tell you how old I am, but I'm not a young kid anymore. And I see people that do LARPing and, of course, everybody kind of maybe shivers a little bit sometimes. They're like, oh no, LARPing. No, I want to do that. I think, damn, that looks cool.
Establish that real quick while we're talking about that. Get rid of all of those fears of being embarrassing in public. I say this to my community all the time. This concept, I hate the concept of cringe. Fuck cringe.
Fuck cringe.
Because cringe, the thing that is doing is telling you that thing, that joy inside of your chest, smother it. Smother it. Because what if someone doesn't like you for it? Okay, but there will be a lot of people who will. The people who, there's a lady on TikTok who says that cringe is freedom, because the moment that you embrace being as embarrassing as you want is the moment that you are going to have fun. If I do all the things that I want to, regardless of how cringy you might find them, at the end of my life, I will have done so many fun things. What will you have done?
That's so good. That is so good. And I'm going to tell you, Rachel, and I don't have to tell Nathan and I don't have to tell Garrett this, that anyone in my family knows that I am never intimidated by doing the embarrassing thing in public. However, I still have not put on armor and grabbed a really cool sword and run around the woods, which is probably the next thing I've got to do. I got to do it. But what does this mean? So let's bring this back to the conversation, because, this is the idea. This is the idea of living in the imagination. But to go back to the Deborah Ann Wall, the beautiful thing about distilling that, there's two things I want to do here. One, I just want to say that as a teacher, that defines really good teaching, is to take a complicated thing, distill it down to that simple, digestible nugget that once you sort of hand it off to whoever you're giving it to, they walk away and everybody realizes, oh yeah, I get that now. But Garrett, you were talking about this idea of when you bring a new player to the game in a session 0, possibly doing a few small versions of that.
Yeah, when I was, getting a little inspired about talking about this subject, I found online someone mentioned, bring a new player. They have no idea about D&D or TTRPGs. Run a little, session 0 one shot with that player, just that player. Run through a dialogue scenario, run through a small combat, help them build a character, and then run that character through a little just glimpse into all the aspects of the game. And, puzzle solving, combat, and dialogue. And I thought that was perfect, because it's just it introduces you in a simple way to it.
Right. And that's so beautiful, because we were just talking about letting go of cringe and embracing that freedom that you have just to do things that feel fun. And in a group setting where maybe you do not know anybody at the table but one person. And that's really hard to let go and become more vulnerable and play another character and maybe be a little cringy, whatever. But in that one-on-one scenario, presumably we're talking because I trust you and I'm asking about D&D because you're my friend and I'm interested in it. It's just you and me now. It's just you and me talking. You're talking me through a scenario and there's nobody else I have to worry about. I can be whoever the hell I want to be with you. So I feel like that might be so much easier to let go of cringe.
And I think it's also really important then to remind that person in that one-on-one that the rest of the people that will be in this room when we play this game also have abandoned this notion of let's go back to cringe. That everybody in this room will behave that way and not judge you for behaving that way. You can let it down. You can let go.
I remember the moment, well, not the exact moment, but I remember the feeling of sitting at this table and letting go of cringe, where I felt really uptight for the first little while. And then everybody else started just doing their own things. I was I think it was actually at someone's door and I was asked a question. I was like, you know what? I'm just going to lie. I'm just going to lie straight to their face. And everybody at the table was like, oh yeah, I lied. I said that I had a wagon full of stuff or something, and everybody at the table was like, "You do?" I'm like, "Fuck, no." No, I don't. I was lying.
But you were starting to use your imagination
Exactly.
in the game openly and freely.
And it really felt like I was a kid again being told that I was permitted but one curse word. Like that little giddy feeling of like, oh my God, like that was so cool. Like it was so bad, you know?
I want to, can I tell a Critical Role story right now?
Absolutely.
Okay, because maybe some people don't know, but Critical Role is coming into their 10th anniversary and they have legends. They're huge, right? Juggernaut of the space is what they're called. I don't know if they like that. But so Travis Willingham, who is in campaign 1, he played their barbarian Grog. He's married to Laura Bailey. These are all huge voice actors. And remember that when they first played together, it was for Liam O'Brien's, I'm just name dropping all of these people, but it was his birthday. Travis has said straight out that he was pretty uninterested, it sounded like, or at least he was intimidated of going. And, but his wife, Laura Bailey, was wanting to do it. She shares a birthday with Liam, so she was going to be there. And so he went. He decided to play a character that would be not very smart, so he wouldn't have to be intimidated by the charisma of them, and strong so that he could engage in the parts that he really thought he might enjoy, like the actual attacking of it. But he was very nervous about being a guy who plays Dungeons and Dragons. He did not want that as a badge on him. But he said that at the table, one of the first things that happened was that his wife, Laura, immediately dropped into Vixalia. And she became Vixalia in that moment and just embraced it. And how beautiful a moment for one person to be brave and to be bold and to be that stalwart guardian of them. And I say it again, cringe. Because then what happens? Everyone else, humans, we really like to fit in. So if no one's doing the funny voice, well, then nobody's gonna do. But if someone does the funny voice, the odds are someone else is gonna. And soon everyone is there, which I do think very often it is the game master, dungeon master, dagger master, whatever you want to call it, that needs to be that stalwart guardian of cringe. Bring those voices, bring big animations, do that thing so your friends feel comfortable in what Nathan said, the trust fall exercise that tabletop RPG is.
Yeah, and I really appreciate you saying that, first of all, because I remember seeing a video by another influential Dungeons and Dragons content sort of talker who's also making their own tabletop role-playing game right now. And the video basically said, you know who I'm talking about? I can see it.
I do, yeah.
The video basically was this giant defensive video against using voices. It was like, voicing is not role-play. And I listened to that, and I'm going to be honest, I treated it fairly. I didn't get defensive about it. I treated it fairly because of two reasons. One, I understand that not everybody is comfortable doing voices at a table, but what we're talking about here is not substituting role play with voicing. What we're talking about here is giving permission to your players to drop their guard and allow themselves to be whatever they want to be, right? And hearing you say that, Rachel, about, like, let's do the voices. And I'm like, yeah, let's do the voices, because it kind of just allows for things to get a little looser and a little bit crazier at the table, right? Someone doesn't want to do the voices, fine. That's fine. I don't mind that so much.
Right.
Anyway,
I was going to say, bringing into this, I came into this and I don't do voices. I'm not, an actor, into all that stuff. But being at the table with the other players, I will definitely drop my guard and get into role play. I might not do, a crazy voice, but I will definitely get in there and, play that character. And it has definitely opened up and expanded since I started playing this, 4 or 5 years ago.
Yeah, I will say, Garrett, in the last 4 or 5 years, I've seen you evolve as a player. And I think a lot of it has to do with this table.
It's the group.
Yeah.
It really is.
Yeah.
And I've seen, I wanted to say this earlier when you were talking about like joining the table, Nathan, you have expanded so much. And I think it really revolves around the table,
Absolutely.
the group dynamic. And I think that's an important part of, welcoming new players into it.
And if the GM or DM has a certain role to play as game master other than facilitating the game, it is this notion of giving the vibe for the room to the table, right? There's like a permission that they give to the table, right? So I feel like GMs, if you feel like you want to welcome players to your table in a way that is, really accessible, you really want people to have a good time, then you have to give them permission to drop their guard. You have to look like you yourself have dropped your guard. You can't run your game one way and expect your players to be another way.
Yeah, I think that's important because I am a game master specifically focused on, especially bringing women of the space, all women, just to clarify, but into the space and everything. So I learned of ways to not trick, but I guess plead the case for people to be vulnerable. And I recently came back from Gen Con 2024, where I was GMing Daggerheart at the Darrington Press conference rooms and everything for a lot of people. And I found out from a lot of other GMs in there that they have the same kind of thing that I do, which is if I'm introducing to a new table, I say at the very top, hey, everybody, this is a weird thing that we're doing, right? You just lampshade it. You say, this is a weird little thing that we're doing, guys, right? This is a very trusting exercise. Let's all agree that this is weird and get it out of the way. Be vulnerable with each other. I'm going to be very embarrassing for the next 3 to 4 hours. So if you want to make me feel a little better, feel the characters that you're playing. Make me feel like less of a dumbass for using voices and stuff, Voices aren't necessary, but I think it's fair,
I agree. And, I think if we're going to talk about, we said earlier, fuck cringe, I would actually say cringe is a lie and vulnerability is about honesty. If you're really going to be honest with your imagination and go back to that sort of native childhood feeling that you had, that's honesty. And I love that you said vulnerability. That's beautiful. First thing I want to say is, number one, get in our comment section on Wither and Bloom Studios over at YouTube, and please, please, please comment on this, because number one, I think you could fuel conversations for future podcasts, right? I don't think this conversation should be in a 45-minute episode. This should be something that we're talking about all of the time. How do we bring these people into a table, make them feel comfortable, give them permission to be vulnerable, talk about honesty, talk about childhood, talk about fuck cringe. All of these things I think are absolutely crucial to making this game more open to more people, thus making our hobby more robust and more fun, frankly. All right, well, listen, I think this is a great place for us to end tonight's conversation. I will say this, Rachel, I loved having you on the show, number one. I want to encourage everybody, like I said at the break, I want you to head on over to the Faint Divinities, both on YouTube and on Twitch. Go find them, watch their content. If you're curious about Daggerheart, a system that is much more based in the narrative storytelling aspects of the game, Rachel and her crew are masters at pulling this game off and really delving deeply into the various changes they've made through each of the different drops. Please, please, please go check them out. They are awesome. Two, hopefully you will also follow us and check out some of our future episodes. We would love that. Nathan, also, thank you so much for introducing this topic today, because this has been a great conversation.
I've enjoyed it so much, and thank you for having me.
Yeah.
And Rachel, it was a pleasure talking with you.
It was so nice talking to all of you. You telling people to come follow you, I'll advocate for that, because you three are here pretty frequently. I'm never here, guys. I usually am in the audience doing little comments. They're great. Their content is great. If you are just listening to this podcast, go check out their actual plays. It's fun. It's great. It's free. It doesn't embrace cringe at all. No, I'm kidding. It does. It's great. It's great, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me. Yeah.
All right. Well, listen, everybody. Thanks again for listening. We will see you next week with something new. I'm not necessarily going to claim I know what that is just yet, but thanks again for listening. Rachel, Nathan, thanks again for coming on the show. We'll talk to you all soon. Take care.
See you
later.
Bye.
All right. right, everybody. iCast Guidance is produced by Todd Lambrix and Garrett Brennan. Head over to YouTube, where we can be found at Wither and Bloom Studios, where you can see the production of this podcast every Sunday morning live at 9 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. We're looking forward to seeing you there. Take care.